Hi guys. Tonight we ease into a winter, so cold that your breath turns white the moment it leaves your mouth. You stand at the edge of a medieval English village, and the air already pinches your cheeks with a sharpness that only deep winter can manage. Frost thickens on every thatched roof. Icicles cling to timber frames like tiny glass knives. Snow packs hard under your boots as you trudge forward, and you feel the stillness of a world where the sun slips away early and gives almost nothing back. For a moment you imagine sleeping here through a night that drops below -20 Fahrenheit. You probably will not survive this. Not without a few tricks. Not without learning how these villagers did it long before anything like central heating existed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you want, you can also tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and feel yourself stepping deeper into the scene as the cold rises up around your ankles and your breath curls like pale smoke. You move farther into the village and everything feels slow, careful, deliberate. The air is so crisp that every whisper seems louder, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifts between crooked cottages. You hear a low creak as a door shifts in the wind. Someone inside is checking how much firewood is left for the night. You sense the worry in that gesture because firewood has always been expensive in winter. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval England faced heavy deforestation in several regions by the late Middle Ages, which made fuel scarce and valuable. That scarcity shapes this entire night. It shapes the way every family prepares for sleep, and it shapes the way you breathe as you step closer to the nearest doorway. You pause at the threshold of a small peasant cottage. A tiny window glows from within. The shutters rattle a little in the harsh wind. You slip inside, and the warmth from the room feels weak but comforting. A smoky fire smoulders in the hearth. The villagers are finishing their evening tasks. They eat something thick and hot, maybe pottage made from whatever root vegetables they managed to store before the first freeze. You can smell the earthy steam rising from the pot. You stand quietly and watch how careful everyone is with their movements. They are trying not to let too much heat escape. The moment they open the door, cold floods in like a living creature. As you look around, another detail catches your attention. A small bundle rests near the hearth. It looks like a lump of twigs, cloth, and something odd. When you crouch down for a better look, you realize it is a quirky warming charm. Some families tucked odd items, such as dried frog skins or carved wooden tokens, into pockets or bedding for luck against winter chills. That strangeness feels both whimsical and desperate. People took comfort wherever they could find it, even if that comfort came from a superstition that lasted only through long nights. The family begins settling for bed. They move slowly. You watch them bank the fire, meaning they pull ashes forward to smother the flame but protect the hidden coals. Banking the fire allows the embers to survive until morning, and you see how they press the ashes carefully with a wooden tool. There is a quiet tension to it. Everyone knows that if the coals die overnight, the cold will punish them for it. Historians still argue whether rural households used particular tools or just bare hands with rags to bank the fire, but the exact method remains uncertain because written records are limited. You lean in and feel the faint warmth that will soon become even weaker as midnight settles in. You shift your attention to the cottage walls. They are made with wattle and daub, a mix of mud, clay, straw, and small stones. The surface looks uneven, and the wooden beams creak softly with each gust of wind. You run your gloved fingers along the wall and feel the tiny vibrations. It is not much of a barrier against cold, and you know it. The people living here know it too. They have stuffed gaps with moss and scraps of cloth in hopes of slowing the icy drafts. In your modern life, you might worry about efficiency ratings or insulation codes. Here, everything is survival. Every rushed repair or rough patch of clay could be the difference between a tolerable night and frozen fingers. Your breath fogs as you inhale the smoky air. You notice a faint scent of rotting rushes from the floor, mixed with the smell of wool and unwashed clothes. The sensory blend, strange as it is, brings a sense of closeness. These families depended on each other and their environment in ways you rarely imagine. The cold does that. It presses everyone into the same space. It turns rooms into ecosystems filled with whispers, sniffles, and the gentle shifting of tired bodies. One of the villagers glances at you with a knowing look. You get the sense that strangers stand out in winter because nothing moves freely during this season. People stay indoors when they can. Animals huddle in barns. The village paths are empty except for a stray dog or someone fetching water from a frozen stream. You understand how isolation becomes part of the nightly rhythm. Winter sleep is not just a biological need, it is a strategy. As you ease into the corner of the room, you allow the warm weight of your clothing to press against your shoulders. Thick wool scrapes your skin. You shift in place and feel the coarse texture catching on your sleeves. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but it works. It holds in heat, traps body warmth, and promises some measure of safety. You close your eyes for a moment. You imagine how villagers layered linen, wool, and sometimes fur. You hear the faint crackle of the fire as a coal breaks apart. A spark flares and dies. Your mind drifts to another thought. The coal changes sound. It sharpens it. Every small noise becomes distinct. The roof timbers pop as frost expands them. A faint whistle slips through a tiny gap in the window frame. Someone coughs softly. A baby fusses for a moment before falling quiet again. You listen to these sounds as though they are part of a lullaby made for difficult nights. Each sound reminds you that this cottage is alive, that warmth is a fragile but shared effort. You take one final long breath. The air is heavy, smoky, and warm in the way that only a small fire in a tightly packed room can be. You sense that the night ahead will teach you more. It will show you how people adapted to cold that would send most modern sleepers running for heated blankets. You feel your body growing quieter as you wait for the next part of the journey. You stay in the peasant cottage only a little longer, before slipping back outside into the cutting dark. The moment you step through the door, the cold clamps onto you like a living hand. It takes your breath for a second. Snow crunches under your boots as you move toward the next cottage, and the night sky feels endless above you. Stars glint like sharp bits of ice. Your eyelashes stiffen with frost as you blink. You push forward because you want to understand how people managed to sleep when there was no heating at all, only a flickering fire that threatened to die before dawn. You follow a narrow footpath that winds between cottages. Every house glows faintly through wooden shutters. These shutters are thin and loose, and you wonder how anyone sleeps with winter scraping at the walls. The truth is that they adapted by using darkness itself as insulation. When night fell, people shut everything tight, covered shutters with cloth, and relied on the thickness of the dark to slow the draft. You picture yourself inside one of these homes at the moment just before sleep. The fire is low. The air is smoky. The room is filled with the quiet patience that winter requires. When you slip into the next cottage, the scene is similar but not identical. Here, the hearth is already dying. A few embers glow like small rubies. A woman kneels beside the hearth with a long iron poker, carefully pushing ash around the embers. She is banking the fire, using slow motions to ensure it will still be alive when the family wakes. This was a mainstream reality in medieval households. Fire was precious. Matches did not exist. Lighting a new flame usually meant using flint and steel, a frustrating method that required practice and luck. Keeping the fire alive overnight was the safer choice. The whole evening revolves around that tiny glow. Your eyes adjust to the low light. You notice that everyone moves with quiet discipline. It is not theatrical. It is survival. You listen as someone whispers about how many logs are left. Fuel scarcity shapes everything. People used peat in some regions, dried turf in others, and sometimes even dried dung when wood was not available. The smell of burning dung might not be pleasant, but it delivered heat, and heat meant life. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some medieval villagers believed that certain types of dung produced better heat because the animals had eaten particular herbs. Imagine betting your comfort on what your cow had for lunch. The dim fire throws shadows that sway across the room. You feel those shadows brushing your face as you step deeper inside. The cold still creeps in through every crack. It moves around your ankles, sneaking across the floor like a low mist. Even with the fire, the temperature inside a medieval cottage could drop shockingly low. Families felt cold that modern sleepers rarely experience. You press your hands together, rubbing warmth into your fingers, and you settle near the hearth. The smoky air coats your throat. Someone places a kettle of water near the embers. They are trying to warm it just a little, enough to use for a quick wash before bed. Bathing was not a daily routine. A simple warm rinse was a luxury. You watch the steam swirl faintly upward before vanishing. The room seems to hold its breath. Outside, the wind prowls around the cottage, pushing against the shutters with impatient fists. You notice how the family prepares the sleeping space. They arrange bedding close to the fire, but not too close, because sparks are dangerous. They lay out coarse blankets, woolen coverings, and old cloaks. They know exactly where the warmest patch of floor is, and you see them moving toward it like instinct. Children curl up first, tucking feet into warm pockets of fabric. Adults settle around them in layers. You observe how the family builds heat like a small living furnace. Everybody becomes part of the insulation. You feel the way warmth gathers slowly, like water filling a cup. They blow out candles, saving the last sliver of wax for another night. Darkness folds over the room. The only light comes from the smouldering hearth. You hear one more log crack. The embers' glow flickers. Someone coughs softly. A baby whimpers and quiets again. These tiny sounds shape the rhythm of sleep. When people finally lie down, they do so in a world that is cold, dark, and quiet in a way that modern noise can hardly replicate. You focus on the fire again. It feels like the center of the room, the center of life. Your eyes follow the faint red coals. Hours from now, those coals might be gone. The room might drop to the same temperature as the open air. Some historians still argue whether medieval cottages reached freezing indoor temperatures or hovered slightly above it, but evidence suggests both extremes occurred depending on region, materials, and wind exposure. You sit with that uncertainty, feeling how fragile the line is between tolerable cold and life-threatening chill. You shift your weight, and a stray breeze slips across your face through a crack in the wall. It carries the scent of frozen earth. You understand why people feared winter nights. Without heating, sleep was not just rest. It was a cautious gamble. Every evening felt like a negotiation between your body and the cold. Would your fire last? Would your blankets hold? Would your breath freeze on the inside of your windows by dawn? You sense how the villagers accepted these risks because they had no choice. Another sound rises. The timbers groan as frost tightens them. You hear that deep, wooden creak, and it feels almost like the house is speaking. You glance up at the rafters where small shadows flicker. A hen flutters on her perch. Some families kept small animals inside during winter nights for added warmth. Not just for convenience, but because even the presence of a few warm bodies shifted the temperature. The closeness of human life and animal life is quietly humbling. You breathe in gently and close your eyes. You let the cold settle around you just enough to feel it, but not enough to overwhelm you. You sit with the knowledge that these nights shaped medieval life in ways modern comforts erase. The cold carved routines, shaped sleep patterns, deepened family bonds, and forced people to think about heat every waking moment. You exhale slowly, letting the smoky air drift past your lips. The night deepens, the fire dims. You wait for what comes next, knowing there is still so much to learn about how people survived the harshest hours of winter. You remain beside the dimming hearth until the last ember glow softens into a sleepy murmur of red light. Then you rise, stretch your legs, and step back into the cold. The air bites the tip of your nose with the same sharp clarity as metal pulled from ice water. You let that cold settle into your coat for a moment, so you can feel the contrast between the faint warmth of the cottage and the brutal night outside. It becomes obvious why people learned to rely on more than fire for survival. They relied on each other. They relied on closeness. They relied on the simple truth that a human body is a furnace that never switches off. You follow a narrow path deeper into the village, guided by the crunch of frozen snow beneath your boots. A thin cloud of frost spirals from your breath. Somewhere ahead, you hear muffled voices and low laughter. You edge toward the sound and find a slightly larger cottage with a thick roof of thatch. The doorway is open just a crack, enough to reveal a soft ripple of light. You slip inside and feel the shift immediately. The room is warm, much warmer than you expect. The warmth is not from the hearth alone, it is from the bodies gathered inside. Several families are here together, sharing the same space for the night. You feel the heat of their presence, the soft hum of their conversations, the way their gathered breaths raise the temperature by small degrees. This is the communal warmth trick, the secret that medieval villagers relied upon when the cold became too sharp to handle individually. One mainstream historical fact supports this. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was common for multiple households to sleep in the same large room during winter, especially in smaller communities where housing was flexible and communal expectations were familiar. You watch as people settle onto shared bedding. They arrange straw mattresses, woolen throws, and old cloaks into something resembling a wide nest. Children crawl to the middle, and adults flank the outer edges. You see how each person contributes a pocket of heat, and you sense how this sleeping cluster becomes something larger than its parts. You realize you are watching a survival strategy disguised as closeness. You also notice the smells that come with it. Warm wool, damp clothing, cooked vegetables, and the faint musk of unwashed bodies all mix into a scent that feels lived in rather than foul. It is the smell of warmth in a cold world. A man notices you standing near the door and waves you closer. His gesture is relaxed, almost sleepy. You move toward the cluster and feel the rising heat as you step in. Someone hands you a rough wool blanket that smells of lanolin. You drape it around your shoulders, and the texture scratches your neck. The warmth, however, builds quickly. The blanket traps your body heat and returns it to you. You sink into that feeling. Another villager, a woman with kind eyes, explains that during the hardest winters, people often slept side by side, not out of sentiment but necessity. You picture yourself lying between strangers, sharing breath with people you met only hours ago. It sounds uncomfortable by modern standards, but here it feels natural. The cold does not care about personal space. It encourages people to become a single, layered organism made of cloth and skin and slow breathing. She leans in and whispers a quirky tidbit. Some households believed that sleeping between two particularly warm people could cure colds or fend off evil spirits that thrived in winter darkness. They even had a playful term for it in certain regions. They called it borrowing heat. You consider that phrase, borrowing heat, as though warmth itself was a kind of currency shared among trusted neighbors. You settle beside a small group and lower yourself onto a straw mattress. The mattress cracks and shifts beneath you. It is uneven and prickly, but surprisingly warm. You feel the heat trapped inside the piled straw. The warmth is faint but steady. You lie back and let your eyes adjust to the quiet glow of the fire at the far end of the room. Shadows cast by the communal cluster move gently, creating a shifting tapestry across the walls. A child beside you murmurs something about a dream she had the night before, involving a giant animal made of snow. Her voice is soft, cottony. Her mother shushes her gently and strokes her hair. The fire crackles faintly. You hear the wintry wind pressing against the walls. But here, inside this packed cottage, the cold stays outside for a little while longer. You shift your position, adjusting your legs beneath the blanket. Your body leans slightly into the person next to you. They do not mind. No one minds. Everyone understands their role in this nightly ritual. Even the way people breathe feels coordinated. You breathe in, you breathe out. The warmth builds. Then your thoughts drift toward the science of this moment. You sense how heat radiates from each person, warming the air, warming the bedding, warming the shared space. It occurs to you that this communal technique is not just a cultural practice, it is a biological hack. In a world without heating, body heat is both reliable and renewable, but not everyone agrees on how common or necessary this sleeping method was. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping was universal or simply a regional habit shaped by tradition rather than climate. The debate continues because written records mostly describe wealthier households, leaving everyday practices of peasants and villagers to interpretation. The noise level in the cottage fades into a soft murmur. A few people whisper quiet stories, while others simply close their eyes and drift into half sleep. You stay awake for a little longer, letting the warm presence of the cluster settle around you. You feel the rhythm of their breaths. You feel the slow relaxation of tired limbs. You feel the contrast between the cutting wind outside and this human cocoon inside. Then someone tucks a large dog into the circle. The dog stretches out, yawns, and curls its body beside a group of children. The added warmth spreads even more. You watch as the dog adjusts itself, nestling deeper into the blankets, becoming another small fire in a room full of tiny furnaces. You let your hand drift across the mattress. The straw has been arranged in tight bundles, creating ridges that feel firm under your fingers. But the mattress warms faster than you expect. Straw traps heat efficiently. That was one of the secrets of medieval bedding. These mattresses were often renewed or fluffed during the day, so that the fibers trapped air. Air becomes insulation. People knew this through instinct and trial, not through scientific vocabulary, but through generations of practice. You close your eyes and picture your modern mattress with its layers of foam and fabric. Then you return your attention to the simple brilliance of straw beneath you. A woman on the far side of the group adjusts the blanket that hangs from a wooden rod above the sleeping space. It falls loosely around the cluster, forming a kind of fabric canopy. This extra layer traps more heat. It reminds you of how modern campers rely on tent insulation. Except here, the tent is improvised from old sheets and animal skins. The air grows warmer, heavier. Your eyelids feel heavy. You hear quiet breathing, soft shuffles, distant wind. These sounds remind you of the first cottage, but here the warmth shifts the mood entirely. This place feels almost safe, almost comfortable. Your thoughts wander for a moment to how different social boundaries were in this world. Privacy was rare. Bodies slept together, worked together, and existed together in ways that modern people rarely experience. Sleep was not an isolated act. It was part of community life. You wonder how many secrets, fears, or friendships grew from nights like this, when people shared warmth and whispered in the dark. Someone beside you shifts their weight, and the mattress crackles again. You feel their movement ripple through the group like a subtle wave. You adjust your own posture, tucking your hands closer to your chest. Your breath fogs faintly in the cold patches of air near the floor but stays warm near your blanket. Then the fire pops. A soft glow spreads across the ceiling beams. You glance upward. Frost glimmers around the edges of the rafters, reflecting the weak light like tiny stars. The ceiling feels close. The room feels smaller than it did before. Everyone here seems wrapped in the same shared dream, drifting together through the coldest night of the year. You breathe out slowly. The warmth around you is enough to lull you into calm relaxation. You no longer feel the bite of winter. You no longer feel the ache in your fingers. You simply feel the slow hum of human closeness. Eventually you open your eyes again. You know you cannot stay here forever. The next part of the village waits. More secrets of winter survival linger in the shadows beyond this door, so you rise quietly, careful not to disturb the sleepers. You wrap the wool blanket around your shoulders one last time. Then you step back into the brittle night air. The cold greets you instantly with its sharp handshake. You inhale deeply, letting the cold reclaim your senses. You feel your warm breath fight against the icy wind. You let the contrast settle into your bones. It is time to move forward. Time to learn what people did after the cluster settled into sleep, how the night unfolded, and what other quiet strategies kept them alive until dawn. You leave the cluster of sleepers behind, stepping once more into the open night where the wind feels sharper and more impatient than before. It prowls across the village like a restless creature, slipping beneath clothing and probing for weaknesses. You draw your coat tighter and follow a faint path lit by the pale shimmer of moonlight on snow. The next home you approach looks older, its thatch sinking a little at the centre, and its timber frame leaning as if tired of standing. Yet you smell something familiar as soon as you approach the door. Straw. Dry straw. A scent that is both dusty and warm. A quiet reminder of how simple materials shaped medieval rest. When you enter, you find a single family preparing their bed for the night. They are spreading layers of straw across a wooden frame, sculpting it into a shape that looks almost like a nest. The movement is rhythmic and patient. You feel the warmth of the hearth only faintly here. The fire is mostly embers, dim and soft, but bright enough to reveal the golden texture of the straw. They do not speak much. Winter nights teach silence. They have done this task so many times that each motion seems memorized by the hands. You kneel beside the straw bed and reach out. The fibers crunch softly beneath your fingers. They bend, then spring back slightly. Straw is deceiving. It looks crude, but it is clever in the way it traps air. That trapped air becomes insulation, the same principle used in down jackets and modern sleeping bags. You tilt your head, appreciating something that people in this room likely understood through experience rather than explanation. A commonly acknowledged detail among medieval historians is that straw bedding was replaced fairly often during winter because fresh straw provided better warmth and cleanliness than old flattened bundles. One of the children spreads a thin linen sheet over the straw, smoothing it with small, determined hands. After the linen comes a thicker woolen layer, softening the mattress further. You adjust your position, watching the process with quiet fascination. You see how each layer transforms the rough base into something more forgiving. You notice the smell too. New straw has its own personality. A little sweet, a little dusty, carrying echoes of summer fields now frozen under layers of frost. As you observe, an older man smiles at you and taps the straw mattress. He gestures for you to lie down, just to feel it. You lower yourself slowly, letting your weight settle into the uneven surface. The mattress crackles beneath you, warm in some spots and cooler in others. You shift your shoulders. The sensation is odd at first, but gradually you understand its charm. The bed shapes itself around you like a loose cradle, not perfect, but surprisingly comforting in the stillness of winter. The man leans closer and shares something peculiar. He says that in some villages, families mixed aromatic plants like meadowsweet or lavender into their straw bedding because they believed the scents kept pests away and encouraged better dreams. It is a small fragment of folklore he passes on with pride. You smile. The idea of a fragrant medieval mattress feels unexpectedly charming, almost luxurious in a world built around survival. You sit up again, letting the straw shift under your hands. The fire sputters, sending a weak glow across the room. You study the scene. Bedding is not just an object here. It is a crafted environment, a place to restore warmth that the day has drained away. You imagine the countless nights when families return to this same bed, exhausted from long hours of labor. Winter days were short but demanding. The cold stiffened muscles. Food was simple. Clothing was heavy. Every evening felt like a small return to safety. You run your fingers along the linen sheet. It is coarse and slightly rough against your skin. Most households had limited fabric, and linen was laborious to produce. Yet here it lies, stretched across the straw, adding a layer of comfort and hygiene. You realize something that scholars often emphasize in discussions about medieval life. Even the poorest households invested care in their sleeping spaces, because rest was one of their few defenses against illness and exhaustion during harsh seasons. You watch the mother of the family shake out a thick blanket made of wool and patches from older garments. She spreads it over the bed, tucking the edges tightly. The motion is almost ceremonial, as if sealing warmth into the bedding like a promise. You notice how the blanket carries the scent of smoke, lanolin, and long use. It is heavy, heavier than any modern quilt. Its weight seems to press winter away. Your eyes wander to the edges of the room. Bundles of rushes lie against the wall, ready to be scattered across the floor. They insulate the ground and absorb some of the cold rising from the earth. A few clay pots sit near the hearth, containing warm water for the night. A wooden stool holds a small bowl of dried berries, saved from autumn. Every object in the room feels chosen with care and purpose. You shift your attention back to the family. They gather on the bed with graceful familiarity. The father lies near the wall, the mother beside him, the children tucked in where warmth is strongest. You see how they wrap themselves in layers of fabric, how they curl inward like sleeping animals conserving energy. The bed creaks softly under their combined weight. The mother strokes the straw beneath her blanket and whispers something to the children about how the mattress will stay warmer through the night if they lie still and let their bodies sink deeper. She speaks as though passing down a piece of inherited wisdom. You sense that she has said these words before on countless winter nights. As the family settles, you think about the comfort level of such a bed. It is not luxurious by modern standards, but it is functional, warm, and adaptable. Straw has advantages. It resists moisture. It holds heat. It can be replaced easily. You imagine how the bed might feel after a few hours of sleep, warmed by shared breath, shared weight, shared quiet. You listen to the sounds of the room. The small fire pops occasionally. A child sighs softly. The father shifts his leg, and the straw crackles in response. You hear the wind outside, growling and sliding across the roof. The contrast between the chaotic weather outside and the stillness inside feels almost sacred. This straw bed becomes a small island of warmth in a sea of winter. You glance upward and notice faint flickers of frost forming on the inner edges of the window frame. The cold pushes against the wooden shutters, trying to invade the room. But the walls hold firm. The bed holds firm. The people hold each other firmly enough. The older man looks at you again and speaks in a low voice. He tells you that beds like this were temporary by nature. Straw broke down. It flattened. It needed to be replaced. He also adds that people sometimes carried bits of straw in their clothes throughout the day without noticing, a little sign that comfort clung to them wherever they went. You like that image, comfort sticking to them like a quiet companion. Then he laughs softly and mentions an odd detail he remembers from his youth. He says that some people believed mice chose the warmest houses based on the scent of straw, and that families used this as a humorous way to brag about whose home was coziest. It is one of those folk beliefs that reveal as much about personality as it does about practicality. You spend a moment in silence, watching the family drift towards sleep. The room grows dimmer. The fire sinks lower. The air thickens with steady rhythmic breathing. You feel yourself relaxing again, drawn into their warmth even from a few steps away. You stand slowly, brushing bits of straw from your clothing. The mattress crackles softly in response. You give the family a gentle nod before stepping toward the door. You brace yourself for the cold waiting outside. When you open the door, winter rushes forward instantly, reclaiming you. The temperature drops sharply. Your breath curls upward in pale ribbons. You inhale deeply, letting the icy air clear your senses. You carry with you the memory of warmth, of straw, of shared sleep. You take a few steps away from the cottage, the snow crunching beneath your heels. The night feels larger again. A new question forms quietly in your mind. If this is how common villagers slept, what other hidden strategies did people use to survive nights like this? You tighten your coat and follow the faint outline of another building in the distance, ready to uncover the next piece of winter wisdom. You walk through the biting night again, your boots pressing deep prints into the glittering crust of snow. The sky above feels impossibly clear, as if winter has polished it into a cold crystal dome. Your breath drifts upward in slow curls. You rub your hands together and think about how warmth becomes a rare treasure out here. A treasure protected by layers of cloth, layers of habit, and layers of old knowledge shaped across generations. As you approach the next home, you notice something different about the light leaking through the shutter gaps. It flickers in a softer tone, almost honey-colored. When you push the door open, the first thing you feel is texture. Thick, scratchy, heavy texture wrapping the entire room. Wool is everywhere, hanging from pegs, draped across benches, folded in dense stacks against the wall. It looks like the house is padded from the inside, dressed for winter just as much as its inhabitants are. A woman sits near the smouldering hearth, carding raw wool with steady motions that send soft fibers floating in the air like tiny pale feathers. She looks up, smiles, and gestures for you to step closer. You do. The warmth in the room is faint, but it is clear that wool makes the difference. It holds heat with a stubborn loyalty. It shields skin from cold air. It even muffles sound slightly, giving the house a gentle hush. You lower yourself onto a wooden stool and take in the details. There is a single wide bed in the room, piled high with woolen blankets. Not thin, decorative ones, but thick, weighty layers woven tightly by hand. You brush your fingers across one. It feels coarse but resilient. The lanolin left in the fibers creates a faint, waxy sheen, and the smell is earthy, almost soothing. You observe the family preparing for bed. They move more slowly now, as if winter asks them to save energy even in their gestures. The father shakes out a large blanket that has been passed down for years. Its edges are frayed. Its center is dense and warm. He lays it across the bed with the carefulness of someone handling a precious object. A commonly accepted detail among textile historians explains this scene well. Wool was one of medieval England's most valuable natural materials, both for trade and for daily survival, because it stayed warm even when slightly damp. That single fact-shaped clothing, bedding, and even the economy. You feel it here. You see it in the quiet pride of the household. The mother hands you a woolen tunic so you can understand its weight. You lift it, surprised by how solid it feels. It seems less like clothing and more like armor against winter. When you press the fabric to your cheek, it scratches, but it also radiates a sense of protection. You imagine wearing it to bed, letting that weight settle over your tired limbs. In this world, weight equals comfort. While you observe the tunic, a young boy wanders over and holds up a tiny wool cap. He pats his head, then hands it to you with a grin. It takes you a second to understand. He wants you to try it on. You slip the cap over your head. It fits snugly, covering your ears. Warmth spreads almost instantly. The boy beams, clearly pleased. He begins explaining that everyone in the house sleeps with caps because cold air collects near the ceiling and floor, and the head loses heat more quickly than people expect. His explanation is simple, but it feels rooted in family wisdom. His father chimes in with a playful detail. He tells you that in some villages, people believed sleeping without a nightcap let winter spirits nibble at your thoughts, making your dreams confused or restless. It is a small piece of folklore, shared with a laugh but remembered as part of the seasonal rhythm. The idea lingers in your mind with strange charm. You watch as the family settles onto the bed. They layer themselves in wool, starting with lighter blankets at the bottom and heavier ones near the top. The mother smooths the edges so no draft can slip in. You notice how the children naturally curl toward warmth, tucking their feet beneath the thick folds. You sit beside the bed for a moment and let your hand rest on the uppermost blanket. The heat building beneath it feels steady and confident. Wool does not warm instantly. It warms gradually, like a slow-burning ember, gathering heat from the sleepers themselves. Each breath, each shift, each moment contributes to the rising temperature. The father adds another layer, but this time it is something exceptional. A rich, dark wool woven more finely than the others. You run your hand across it. It feels smoother, almost silky in comparison. He explains that this piece is made from the fleece of their best sheep, sheared in late spring, spun carefully, and woven by his own mother. You sense the emotional weight in his voice. This blanket carries memory, labor, and hope. Winter has a way of making sentimental objects practical and vice versa. You glance around the room and notice something else. The walls are draped with rough woolen cloth. This is not decoration, it is defense. Hanging wool along the interior walls creates a barrier against drafts, trapping warm air near the bed. The fabric shifts slightly when wind presses against the exterior timbers. It moves like a kind of soft shield. As you examine the room, the older woman carding wool finally speaks. She mentions that wool garments were often brushed with certain oils or fat mixtures to improve their ability to repel moisture. She laughs quietly and says the smell could be unpleasant, but the warmth was worth it. You sense her experience in every word. She pauses her carding and tells you something scholars often discuss when studying medieval winters. She explains that wool was not just for warmth, it also represented stability. It was a resource families relied on, traded with, paid rent through, and depended upon for almost every season of life. The wool trade fed entire regions. Even kings measured part of their wealth in fleece. Understanding wool is understanding the medieval world. As the family drifts towards sleep, the room grows quieter. The fire settles into a gentle red pulse. Shadows soften. The wool curtains along the walls ripple faintly, as if breathing with the night. You let your own body relax, absorbing the warmth that seems to float through the room like invisible steam. A young girl pulls her blanket tighter and mutters something drowsy about how she hopes the cold does not creep under the door tonight. Her brother reassures her by pulling her closer. Their voices, tired and warm, melt into the air. You sit there in that softness for several minutes. You listen to the faint whir of the wool carder as the older woman finishes her last handful of fibre for the night. You hear the faint whistle of wind outside. You hear the bed creak as someone adjusts their legs. You understand in this moment how deeply wool shaped comfort in a world without heating. It was not fancy, it was not glamorous, but it was faithful. It trapped body heat, softened rough bedding, wrapped children and elders in protective weight, and transformed freezing rooms into tolerable havens. Eventually you rise, returning the cap to the cheerful boy. You pull your coat tight and step back toward the door. The woman smiles at you once more, then dims the lantern. When you step outside, the cold hits you immediately, but you carry the memory of warmth with you like a hidden ember tucked beneath your clothing. Wool survives beyond the fire. It lingers in your skin, your senses, your understanding. You walk away from the cottage, watching your breath drift upward like pale smoke, ready to discover the next way medieval people turned impossible cold into survivable night. You continue through the sleeping village, your footsteps sinking into soft layers of snow that sparkle beneath the moonlight. The cold wraps around you with fresh determination, slipping into seams and tugging at your sleeves. It feels colder now than before, as if the night has deepened its grip. You hug your arms to your chest and wander toward a larger building near the center of the settlement. The silhouette tells you this home belongs to someone with status. The roof is higher. The timber beams are straighter. A faint golden glow leaks through shutter cracks in thicker streams than the poorer cottages allowed. You sense warmth inside, not the thin survival heat you left behind, but something richer. When you enter, you feel it instantly. The air here carries a gentle softness, the sort that signals privilege. The fire in the hearth is still alive, not merely embers glowing in surrender. Logs burn with patient strength, sending waves of warmth rolling across the room in slow pulses. A subtle scent of beeswax and roasted grain drifts through the air. The floors are cleaner, covered with woven carpets that mute your steps. You take a few more steps inside, letting the warmth seep through your clothing until your shoulders relax. This is a wealthier household, and wealth means options. The difference becomes clear as you lift your eyes to the centerpiece of the room, a magnificent featherbed resting atop a carved wooden frame, elevated proudly above the cold ground. You approach it slowly, drawn to its height and soft, overstuffed shape. The feather bed looks impossibly plush compared to the straw mattresses of the previous cottages. Its surface curves slightly, as if welcoming a tired body with open arms. A man of the house, dressed in a padded robe lined with fur, notices your interest and gestures for you to come closer. His movements are unhurried. He carries the relaxed confidence of someone protected from the harshest realities of winter. When you stand beside the feather bed, he pats it affectionately. You sink your hand into the top layer and feel it yield under your touch, soft and buoyant. The feathers shift inside, adjusting to your pressure with a luxurious whisper. You almost expect warmth to bloom immediately beneath your palm. It feels like a small escape from the cold, hidden in plain sight. The man explains that this feather bed belonged to his father, and before that to his grandfather. These items lasted for generations when cared for properly. He mentions that goose down from well-tended flocks produced the warmest, lightest filling, prized even more than wool by those who could afford it. He tells you something widely noted in economic histories. Featherbeds were so valuable that they often appeared in wills, listed alongside land, livestock, or gold. The idea stays with you, a testament to how deeply winter shaped priorities. His wife approaches, holding a linen sheet she has just finished inspecting. The cloth is smooth, finer than most people could ever buy. She spreads it over the feather bed with calm precision. The sheet falls gently, settling into the soft contours beneath. Next she adds a quilt made of dyed wool squares stitched into patterns. The seams show years of repair. She smooths it fondly, as though tending a beloved companion rather than an object. Then she lifts a second quilt. You recognize something different in its weight and richness. This one is filled with down as well. When she unfolds it, the fabric drifts through the air with slow grace. You watch how it traps warmth almost immediately. She tells you they layer blankets in winter based on the cold. Tonight is especially harsh, so they will use both quilts. You imagine the weight and comfort of lying beneath them. It must feel like sleeping under a warm cloud. A young servant steps into the room, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He lays it gently on the edge of the bed. When he unwraps it, you see several small feather-filled pillows, unusually plump and clean. He shakes them briskly, fluffing them to restore their shape. The feathers inside rustle quietly. You catch the scent of dried herbs, tucked lightly into the pillow linings. He explains that the herbs discourage insects and add a faint, soothing smell for sleep. A detail often mentioned in medieval household records comes to mind. Wealthier families sometimes perfumed their bedding with mixtures of herbs such as rose petals, marjoram, or chamomile. It was not only pleasant, but believed to influence dreams in healthier directions. You breathe in, detecting a hint of chamomile lingering in the room. It calms you in a way you did not expect. You step back to observe the entire bed as it comes together layer by layer. It resembles a miniature hill of comfort in the center of the room, capable of holding heat far better than any bundle of straw or pile of cloaks. You imagine how the owners sink into it each night, feeling their bodies enveloped in softness while the winter rages outside. As the couple continues preparing for sleep, the man mentions an interesting dispute that scholars sometimes bring up when studying medieval households. He says that some old accounts claim featherbeds were kept away from the coldest walls to prevent feather clumping, while others suggest families placed them near interior walls for insulation. He shrugs gently, acknowledging that practices varied. Explanations differ depending on region, tradition, and available space. No one can be certain which was more common. You sit on the edge of the feather bed, letting your weight sink into the soft layers. It feels entirely different from straw, wool, or shared communal warmth. This is a deliberate luxury made possible by economic stability. You shift slightly. The bed shifts with you, absorbing motion smoothly. A sense of security settles into your muscles. You understand why such beds were treasured. The mother of the house shows you another item. She brings out a fabric cover stuffed with feathers that they call a bolster. She places it near the head of the bed. It serves as both back support and a barrier against drafts. You touch it and feel it spring gently beneath your fingers. You admire how each item, each small improvement, builds layers of comfort that transform the sleeping space into a winter refuge. A girl, likely their daughter, approaches carrying a fur coverlet. The fur is soft and dark. She lays it across the foot of the bed. You brush it with your hand. It feels warm even before anyone touches it. Fur retains heat in a way that almost seems magical. She tells you that on the coldest nights, she pulls it all the way up to her chin. You picture her sleeping beneath it, safe from the icy winds. The father sets a wooden chest beside the bed and opens it. Inside are more blankets, folded neatly. He chooses one made of thickly woven wool, dyed in deep, earthy colours. He spreads it across the bed as the final layer. The structure of the bedding now resembles a fortress built from comfort rather than stone. The featherbed base supports everything above it. Quilts and blankets lock in heat. The fur coverlet adds protection. The linen sheet provides softness against the skin. You feel grateful just looking at it. Then you notice something else in the room. A small tapestry hangs near the bed, depicting a hunting scene. The thick fabric helps block drafts from the wall. Wealthier families often use tapestries for insulation as well as decoration. The image on it glows in the firelight. A deer leaps through a woven forest. A hound follows in mid-stride. The colours flicker like living flame. The daughter speaks softly, explaining that she likes falling asleep while staring at the tapestry. The shapes blur in the dimming firelight and become something dreamy. Her mother smiles and gently brushes her hair. You feel a warmth that does not come from fire or feathers, but from family tenderness. As they finish preparing, the household grows quieter. The fire still burns, but its crackles soften. The room fills with an intimate calm. You sit on the featherbed, feeling yourself drawn towards sleep by the gentle pull of the quilts and the rhythmic breathing around you. Then you stand, knowing you must continue your journey. The father thanks you for visiting. The mother gives a small bow of farewell. You step toward the door, feeling the weight of warmth in your clothing. The feather bed lingers in your senses like a soft memory. When you step outside again, the cold shocks your lungs. The wind sweeps across you, urging you forward. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward. The village waits with more secrets, more fires, more beds, more ways humans learn to soften a harsh night. You keep walking. You continue along the silent village lane, feeling the icy wind press against your coat as if trying to herd you back indoors. But curiosity pushes you forward. You want to know how else people in this age carved out warmth from a world determined to freeze them. Your boots crunch through the powdered snow until you reach a cottage that looks different from the others. It is narrower and slightly taller, its upper floor jutting out over the lower one like a protective brow. A thin trail of smoke leaks from a small chimney. The shutters are closed tight, and yet you sense something unusual inside. When you ease the door open, a gentle pocket of warmth drifts out. It is not as strong as the heat in the wealthier home you visited, but it is unmistakably warmer than the open room you expect. You step inside and suddenly the layout becomes clear. This house has a built-in sleeping niche carved directly into the wall. You stare at it with growing fascination. The niche is like a wooden box tucked into the structure of the house, raised slightly above the floor and enclosed on three sides by thick timber walls. A curtain hangs across the open side. When you push the curtain aside, a small compartment reveals itself, just large enough for two adults to lie curled within it. You can smell wool, dry straw, and the faint lingering scent of herbs. The space feels cocooned, sheltered from drafts that wander freely through the main room. A woman seated near the hearth looks up from her mending and smiles. She tells you softly that this niche has served her family for 3 generations. You crouch down and run your fingers along the smooth wood of the inner walls. Warmth lingers there. You notice that the wood seems slightly darker where years of body heat have soaked into it. Someone added a layer of old wool along the back wall for insulation. You can imagine how the small space transforms into a pocket of comfort once bodies settle inside it. She invites you to climb in for a moment, When you do, the difference shocks you. Inside the niche, your breath warms the air quickly. The ceiling is low, and the space is small enough that the cold cannot chase you. You feel like you are tucked inside the house itself, embraced by its structure. This is warmth created not by fire or luxury, but by clever design. The family uses the niche the way people today might use a sleeping bag. You let your hands rest on the worn blanket beneath you, noticing the soft rise of old straw shifting underneath. The woman explains that these enclosed beds, sometimes called wall beds or tucked beds, became popular in certain regions because houses were drafty and heating fuel was limited. A widely repeated detail in architectural history notes that these niches trapped heat remarkably well, especially when paired with thick curtains. They turned the act of sleeping into a kind of retreat from the night. You imagine families sliding inside, drawing the curtain, and closing themselves into a warm cocoon while winter prowled outside. The woman gestures toward the main room. She points out that the shape of the house funnels cold air through certain corners but never into the niche. The niche sits above the floor where cold settles, but below the roof where warm air escapes. It is positioned exactly where warmth lingers longest. You admire the intelligence behind the design. It shows how architecture adapts to climate even when builders work with simple tools and local materials. She sits beside you and continues mending a pair of woolen socks. She mentions that when she was a child, she loved climbing into the niche on winter afternoons just to feel how quickly it warmed around her. She smiles at the memory, describing how she used to pretend it was a secret cave protected from snow spirits. Her voice is soft, but her eyes shine with fondness. A little boy runs over and crawls into the niche beside you. He sets down a small wooden horse carved from a scrap of oak. He tells you that this is his favorite place in the house because the niche feels like it hugs him. You laugh quietly as he snuggles deeper into the blankets. Children know warmth instinctively. They gravitate toward it like birds finding sheltered branches. The woman adds another detail, a bit of oral wisdom passed down by her ancestors. She explains that some people believed sleeping in enclosed spaces allowed dreams to grow clearer because the mind stayed warmer and more relaxed. Whether or not that is true, the idea feels charming. She shrugs gently, acknowledging that traditions grow from both practicality and imagination. You settle against the back wall of the niche, letting your breath warm the small chamber. The space grows noticeably more comfortable after only a few minutes. The boy shifts closer to you, giggling when your elbow brushes his arm. The privacy of this nook feels rare in a world where most families live in single-room houses. You realize how valuable even a small sense of enclosure must have been during harsh winters. The fire crackles faintly at the far end of the room. The orange light dances through the curtain opening, casting soft shapes on the wooden ceiling. You listen to the sounds of the house. Wind taps at the shutters. The fire shifts with gentle pops. The woman hums quietly as she sews. Everything feels intimate, protected. After a while, you lean out of the niche and study the exterior structure more closely. The wooden frame surrounding it is thick. You notice that the builders reinforced it with additional planks, likely to block drafts that slip through the outer walls. Straw has been packed between the planks and sealed with a mixture of clay and hair. You press your hand against the wall. It is warmer than the rest of the room. The insulation makes a difference. The woman tells you that her family sleeps in the niche on the coldest nights, leaving the wider bed in the main room for storing spare blankets and clothing. She laughs and says that when her children were younger, they used to hide inside the niche during play, pretending it was a ship sailing across icy seas. In winter, imagination becomes another tool for survival. As you step out of the niche and stretch your muscles, the boy crawls out with you, clutching his wooden horse. He hands it to you as a temporary gift, saying you can borrow it for the night. You tuck it into your coat pocket with a smile. You thank the woman for letting you experience the niche. She nods warmly, then closes the curtain to save the warmth inside. The fabric rustles softly and falls into place. You stand for a moment, watching the gentle sway of the curtain before turning toward the door. When you step outside again, the cold does not feel quite as sharp. You carry a memory of compact, sheltered comfort inside you, a sense of closeness to the house, to the people, to the winter itself. The snowflakes drifting from the sky seem gentler now, almost like soft reminders of how humans reshape their environment with creativity. You breathe in deeply. The air tingles in your lungs. The night is still vast, but you feel braver facing it. There are more secrets to winter sleep, more corners of history waiting. You take another step forward, ready for the next discovery. You move away from the house with the snug sleeping niche, feeling the cold wrap itself around you again, like a determined reminder that comfort in this world is temporary. The wind sighs through the village lanes. Snow swirls in thin spirals across the ground, whispering against your boots as you walk. You take a slow breath, watching it fog in front of you, and follow the faint flicker of firelight leaking from another cottage nearby. Something about the silhouette of this home draws your attention. The roof is a little steeper, the walls more tightly packed with daub, and the shutters have thick cloth draped over their inner frames. As you approach, you notice long strips of fabric hanging near the doorway, pulling slightly in the draft. You step inside the cottage and immediately feel why. Heavy bed curtains dominate the room, enclosing the sleeping area in thick folds of fabric. The hearth glows gently, but it is clear that the main source of warmth in this house comes from something far less dynamic than fire. It comes from cloth, thick, breathless, shielding cloth. A man sits near the bed, carefully brushing a curtain panel with a stiff bristled broom to remove dust. He looks up, smiles, and invites you to come closer. You move toward the bed and feel the temperature shift with each step. The air surrounding the enclosed space is noticeably warmer than the rest of the room. You part the curtains slightly, and warm air sighs against your face like a gentle welcome. Inside the curtained space are 2 straw mattresses layered with soft wool blankets. The woman of the house sits on the mattress, adjusting small herbs tied in little cloth bundles along the curtain rods. She explains that they hang these fragrant bundles to freshen the air and reduce the musty smell caused by humidity trapped inside the curtains. Their scent is earthy and soothing, a mix of lavender, marjoram, and dried mint. You breathe it in and feel a momentary calm settle over you. She pats the mattress and invites you to sit. When you do, the curtain fabric falls behind you with a soft thump. The enclosed bed suddenly feels like a warm bubble, sealed off from the relentless cold outside. You run your hand along the inside of the curtain. It is thick, almost quilted, layers of woolen cloth stitched together. The woman explains that fabric like this does not flow easily, and that is the point. The less air that moves through it, the more heat stays trapped inside. She smiles and adds that in some households, bed curtains were so prized that they were mentioned in dowries, passed between generations, or even used to settle debts. The idea amuses you, a curtain as currency, but after sitting inside this warm pocket of air you understand why. In winter, warmth is wealth. You lean back a little and let the curtain fall into its natural position. Light filters through the fabric in soft gold patterns, giving the tiny enclosed space a half dreamlike quality. Outside, the wind whistles faintly through the gaps in the shutters, but the curtain muffles it until it becomes nothing more than a distant hum. You suddenly feel the cocoon effect that medieval people depended on. It is a small sanctuary born from fabric and breath. The man joins you and points out the wooden frame above the bed that supports the curtains. He explains that the frame must be strong enough to carry the weight of the cloth, which grows heavier in winter as dampness creeps in from the breath of sleeping bodies. He knocks on the frame lightly, and the wood answers with a dull, confident sound. He tells you that this frame is older than he is. He grew up sleeping beneath it. His own father added panels to it when the winters grew harsher. As the woman adjusts a blanket, she explains something often repeated in studies of medieval domestic life. Curtains were not just about keeping warmth in, they were also about privacy. Most families lived in one large room, so these curtains offered a rare sense of separation. Behind them, people whispered stories, shared secrets, or simply enjoyed the illusion of solitude. You imagine how precious that privacy must have felt after a day of constant work and shared space. You reach out and trace a line of stitching along the curtain. The needlework is simple but strong, done with thick thread, designed to endure constant pulling. The woman tells you that she stitched these curtains herself, adding patches whenever they grew thin. She points to a faded square of fabric that once belonged to her grandmother's cloak. It adds strength and memory at the same time. The man laughs softly and tells you a bit of village humour. Some people joked that if your bed curtains had too many holes, the cold would slip in like an unwanted guest and join the family in bed. He taps one patched area and nods approvingly, proud of their handiwork. His smile carries the warmth of someone who knows how much these curtains protect him through winter. You sit quietly for a moment, absorbing the comfort inside the curtained bed. The sensation of warmth creeping into your limbs feels like a reward after walking through the icy village night. You lean back and let yourself savor the stillness, listening to the low crackle of the hearth beyond the curtain. After a short while, you lift the curtain and step out. The temperature difference hits you immediately like a cold hand pressing against your chest. You inhale sharply. The room outside the curtain feels several degrees colder. You instinctively pull your coat tighter. The contrast tells you everything about the brilliance of this simple design. The woman now rearranges the blankets inside the bed. She fluffs one woolen layer and tucks it at the foot of the mattress. She speaks softly about how much heat the curtains save, not just through insulation but through trapping body warmth. Once people settle inside and breathe together, the bed warms like a miniature room. The husband nods and adds that on the harshest nights, they sometimes hang an extra curtain layer, creating a second barrier that helps trap more warmth. He gestures to a folded curtain hanging neatly near the wall. You run your hand along its coarse surface. It feels heavy, like winter pressed into cloth. He also mentions an interesting debate that researchers occasionally discuss when studying medieval fabric practices. Some argue that households used bed curtains not only for warmth, but also as a way to display status through fabric quality, while others claim the designs were mostly practical and rarely decorative. He shrugs, acknowledging that both ideas may hold truth depending on the household. There was no single correct way to survive the cold. You crouch down and look at the bottom of the curtains where they brush the floor. The edges are weighted with small stones sewn into the hem. You lift one slightly. It tugs downward, ensuring the curtain falls straight and seals the warm space more effectively. This detail surprises you. It is clever and subtle, a reminder of how people solved problems with creativity. The woman folds her hands and tells you that she sometimes reads to her children inside the curtains by candlelight, though very carefully because open flames near fabric are dangerous. She describes how the curtain glows softly when lit from inside, turning the bed into a tiny illuminated den. You picture that tender image, a mother reading stories in warm half-darkness while the cold wraps tightly around the outside walls. She invites you to lie down for a moment to fully understand the comfort. You settle onto the mattress and pull a section of curtain closed. The warmth wraps around you almost instantly. The stillness inside makes you feel suspended, sheltered from everything beyond the cloth. It is astonishing how a simple set of heavy curtains can create such a gentle haven. You stay there only long enough to appreciate the ingenuity of the design, then rise again, knowing your journey is far from finished. The couple thanks you for visiting. You offer them a grateful nod and step toward the door. When you leave the cottage, the cold snaps at you immediately, but now you feel ready for it. You have seen how people push back against winter with fabric alone. You walk down the snowy path, breath rising like ghosts in the air, eager for the next shelter and the next secret of medieval nights. You continue down the icy path, the wind tugging at your sleeves with playful cruelty, as if reminding you that comfort never lasts long out here. A thin veil of snow drifts from the rooftops each time a gust sweeps through the village. You pull your collar higher and keep walking, guided by faint sounds that roll through the night. Low grunts, shuffling hooves, the muffled rustle of hay. These are not sounds of people. These are nighttime voices of the animals that share the rhythms of winter with the villagers. You follow the noise until you reach a sturdy timber building attached to a small cottage. Warm breath curls from gaps between the boards, glowing in the moonlight like mist rising from hidden springs. You step closer and smell it instantly, the deep, earthy scent of livestock, warm hide, dried hay, old straw. It is a dense aroma, familiar and grounding. You push open the barn door and step into heat so sudden that you inhale sharply out of surprise. The barn radiates warmth in a way you have not felt in any human dwelling so far. Animals create their own climate. Their bodies release steady heat, and the thick bedding beneath them insulates it further. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dim lantern hanging near the door. The light reveals cows shifting lazily, a pair of goats chewing cud even at this late hour, and a few chickens perched on a beam, feathers puffed out like tiny winter coats. A man sits on a wooden stool near a cow, mending a harness with slow, deliberate stitches. He looks up and greets you with sleepy friendliness. He gestures for you to come in and close the door to keep the warmth inside. You do, and the temperature rises even more, embracing you like a heavy blanket. The difference is astonishing. Outside, the cold stings. In here, it feels almost like early spring. The man explains that during the harshest winters, families often slept in or near the barn, especially if their house was poorly insulated. He chuckles softly and says that cows are more reliable than fire because they never let their body heat drop. You glance around the space again, feeling a sense of practicality woven into every beam. The barn is not simply a workplace. It is a shelter for humans as much as animals. He invites you to follow him into a corner where a raised wooden platform sits beneath a thick overhang. On the platform rests a simple bed made of straw, covered with a coarse wool blanket. It looks rough but inviting compared to the freezing outdoors. He pats the blanket and tells you that sometimes, on the coldest nights, his family moves out here to sleep with the animals. It was never considered shameful. It was considered sensible. You sit on the edge of the platform and feel the warmth rising from the ground. You run your hand through the straw. It is dry and thick, holding pockets of heat like tiny insulated chambers. Above you, the cow flicks its ears, shifting its weight with a low rumble. A wave of warm air rolls over you again. The cow's breath steams the air in soft puffs. The man laughs quietly and shares a light-hearted piece of rural wisdom. He says that goats are better bed companions than cows because goats wiggle closer, while cows prefer to remain dignified and keep their distance. He follows the joke with a story about a neighbor who claimed his goat once stole his blanket during the night. Whether or not that tale is true, it adds a charming layer to the image. He steps over to a pig pen where a pair of plump pigs nestle together under a mound of hay. Pigs generate remarkable warmth. Some families would let them sleep in attached sheds, or even in special corners of the house during winter nights. You watch the pigs breathe in slow tandem, their bodies radiating heat like small furnaces. The man taps the fence gently and says that pigs are loyal sources of warmth, though not exactly scent-free. You smile despite the lingering odor in the air. You hear a soft clucking sound above you. One of the chickens shifts on its beam, feathers ruffling. Chickens do not produce as much heat as larger animals, but their presence still lifts the temperature of the room by a few degrees. More important, they contribute to the sense of shared life. You look up at them and think about how many medieval nights were warmed by the presence of creatures whose survival was intertwined with human survival. The man now gestures toward the main cottage entrance that connects to the barn. He explains that in some homes, the cottage and the animal shelter shared a wall, so warmth could seep from one into the other. People took advantage of every bit of heat nature offered. He lifts a lantern and points to the wooden boards in the shared wall. They are warm to the touch. The animals on the other side breathe, shifting gently, and their warmth passes through as if moving with intention. While you walk with him, he mentions an observation commonly discussed in studies of medieval farming life. The reliance on animals for warmth was not seen as crude or primitive. It was viewed as a wise use of resources. Livestock was central to the family's survival, and their warmth was a natural gift in bitter winters. He brushes his hand along the flank of a cow and smiles with quiet pride. You crouch near the straw bedding again, letting your fingers sift through it. The heat from the animals mixes with the earthy scent of hay, creating a strange but comforting atmosphere. The barn feels alive, full of steady breathing and slow movements. There is a calming rhythm here, no hurried shuffling, no chattering voices, just the sound of creatures resting together against the night. The man sits back on his stool and tells you about an ongoing debate among agricultural historians. Some believe that sleeping in barns was a significant winter practice among the rural poor across England, while others argue it was less common and mostly reserved for emergencies or extreme weather. Written records differ, and oral accounts are scattered, leaving room for interpretation. He shrugs, acknowledging the uncertainty, and adds that in this village families do whatever the cold demands. You continue observing the barn. The lantern light glows softly across rough wooden beams, catching flecks of dust drifting like tiny sparks. You smell warm hay, animal breath, and faint smoky hints carried from the hearth next door. These scents blend into something raw and honest. A young girl enters the barn with a small basket of grain. Her cheeks are pink from the cold outside. She sprinkles the grain into a wooden trough and pats the side of a goat affectionately. When she notices you watching, she smiles shyly and tells you this is her favorite place in winter. She says the barn feels like a big breathing blanket wrapped around all of them. You find her words simple yet perfect. A breathing blanket. That is exactly what it feels like. As she finishes her chores, she picks up a handful of hay and tosses it playfully toward a chicken. The chicken clucks indignantly, hops twice, then resettles on its perch. The girl laughs softly. Her father joins her, and they speak for a moment in low, gentle tones. You can sense that this barn is more than a shelter. It is a place where family gathers, works, and sometimes sleeps. The girl looks at you again and tells you that when the wind screams through the village and frost forms on the inside of the cottage windows, they stay here. Her mother warms stones by the hearth and brings them to the barn to place under the bedding. Her father stacks extra hay along the walls to block drafts. They sleep close together, wrapped in thick blankets, listening to the animals breathe. She describes it as cozy, like sharing dreams with the creatures they care for. You feel a quiet admiration settle in your chest. This simple barn, with its coarse straw and earthy smells, reveals a warmth more genuine than luxury. It shows how deeply intertwined their lives are with the animals that sustain them. Here, survival is a shared effort among humans and beasts alike. You thank the family and step back toward the barn door. When you push it open, the cold greets you again with icy teeth. But this time you carry a different understanding of warmth. Not just heat from fire or fabric, but warmth born from connection, instinct, and cooperation. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift into the night, and continue down the snowy path in search of the next story waiting in the dark. You walk on, guided now by a faint shimmering glow that seems to pulse gently in the distance. The village has grown quieter, the wind settling into long, steady breaths that sweep over the snow like soft brushes. Your boots sink slightly with each step, the cold tightening around your ankles in little pinches. You follow the glow until the silhouettes of tall timbers rise ahead. The building is larger than any cottage you have entered so far, with high walls and thick beams that cast long shadows in the moonlight. This must be the manor's great hall, the heart of warmth and authority in a medieval community. You approach the heavy door. Light seeps through its edges, warm and promising. When you push it open, a gust of heat washes against you in a slow wave. You inhale, letting your chest loosen with relief. The hall is enormous, far wider than the cottages scattered across the village. The ceiling disappears into darkness. The air carries aromas of roasted grain, wood smoke, and resin. Across the stone floor, The last fire of the evening still flickers, burning low but glowing with a calm reddish hue that fills the hall with soft light. Several servants are finishing their nightly tasks. They sweep ash near the hearth, fold blankets, and set wooden mugs upside down on tables for the next day. Their movements are quiet, unhurried, worn down by a long routine. You step closer to the hearth, drawn as if by magnetism. The heat is stronger here than in the cottages. Even though the fire is fading, large stones around the hearth radiate stored warmth. You kneel and place your hand near them. The heat ripples upward gently, almost soothing your chilled fingers back to life. One of the servants nods to you as he collects firewood for the morning. He explains that the great hall fire burns much longer than household hearths because it is built with large logs. He gestures to a thick, partially charred log resting in the embers. Its surface glows in streaks of deep orange. He tells you that these big logs are meant to last through most of the night, so the Lord's family and their guests do not wake in freezing conditions. He crouches beside you, and adds that the heat from the great hall often helps warm the surrounding chambers too, even if only slightly. It is one of the few places in the village where you can feel warmth long after the flames have died down. You nod, understanding why people cherish the time spent near this fire. You sit on a low bench near the hearth. The thick stone radiates heat beneath you. You glance across the hall, noticing how everything glows with amber tones. Tapestries along the walls flutter faintly with the movement of warm air. Their woven scenes of hunts and battles shimmer in the firelight. The colours appear almost alive. A young woman approaches, carrying an armful of rushlights. She places them near a table and pauses to warm her hands by the fire. She tells you that she and the others often sleep in the hall during harsh winter nights, spreading their blankets near the embers after the household retires to private chambers. The lingering heat offers more comfort than their cold servants' quarters. She smiles shyly, then begins trimming the ends of the rushlights with a small knife. You watch her work, noting how the smell of resin mixes with the warm air. She explains that they dip the rush pith in animal fat to make them burn longer. The idea is simple but effective, giving a soft glow to the hall long after sunset. You imagine the hall at night, dimly lit by faint flames while people asleep nearby, breathe in slow harmony with the embers. You stand and walk closer to the hearth, noticing the thick iron andirons that support the massive logs. Their surfaces glow faintly with absorbed heat. You place your hand near one and feel warmth radiating off it. Heat lingers here with surprising loyalty. Even as the fire shrinks into a cluster of glowing coals, the warmth remains like a memory. A man steps in from a side door, wrapped in a heavy cloak. He rubs his arms and tells you that this hall is built to trap heat. The high roof lets smoke drift upward, but the thick stone walls absorb warmth and release it slowly. He taps a wall with his knuckles. The stone feels warm under your touch. It is remarkable. In this age of thin walls and leaky roofs, this hall feels almost indulgent. He mentions a point often noted in architectural studies. Larger halls, especially those belonging to nobles or wealthy landowners, were constructed with materials that helped retain warmth. Stone absorbs heat from the fire during the day and radiates it back during the coldest hours of the night. You can feel that principle in action with every breath you take inside the hall. He moves to the far side of the room where a large wooden table sits, still draped with daytime clutter. A half-eaten loaf, a pair of wooden bowls, a dog curled beneath the bench. The dog lifts its head, sniffs the warm air, and drops back into sleep. Animals, even here, share the same search for comfort. The servant leads you to a smaller alcove at the edge of the hall. Inside, a bed made from layered blankets sits near a half-open window shutter. He explains that sometimes the younger servants compete for this sleeping spot because it is closest to the stones warmed by the hearth all day. You kneel and place your hand on the bed. The blankets feel heavy and warm, infused with the heat that lingers in the hall's core. He laughs and adds a small story. Last winter, 2 servants raced across the hall to claim this warm spot at bedtime. only to discover that the Lord's hound had already curled up there and refused to move. The group ended up sleeping around the dog, grateful for its warmth. The story makes you smile, a small glimpse into the playful side of winter life. The woman with the rushlights returns and begins placing them in wall holders. Their dim glow joins the fading hearth light. She tells you quietly that even in noble homes, nights get cold enough to numb fingers and stiffen joints, but the fire in the great hall protects them better than anything else available. The servants gather here before the embers vanish and whisper stories, singing sometimes in soft voices until sleep catches them. She pauses and shares a fragment of folklore that her grandmother used to tell. If a person slept too far from the hearth during a deep freeze, their dreams could wander into landscapes of frost, and they might not find the path back to their body by morning. The belief is poetic rather than literal, but it speaks to the deep respect people held for warmth during nights like this. As you stand again near the center of the hall, you take in the whole room one more time. The tapestries glow with reflected fire. The stones breathe heat. The soft sounds of a dog shifting echo faintly. The servants' footprints in the ash-laden floor tell stories of a long day. You feel immersed in their world, sensing the balance between luxury and necessity. A slight crack from the hearth catches your attention. One of the embers breaks apart, revealing a brighter glow inside. A wave of heat sweeps outward, touching your face. You savor it, knowing that the fire will fade soon, and the hall will cool into another long winter night. You step toward the door, preparing to leave. The servants nod farewell. You push the door open and feel the cold rush in, eager to reclaim the air. You inhale sharply as the temperature difference shocks your senses. Outside, the village lies quiet under a cloak of moonlit snow. You take a few steps away from the hall, feeling both chilled and warmed by what you have just experienced. There is still more to discover. More ways people endured the biting cold. More nights waiting to be understood. You walk on, breath rising in pale ribbons as you move toward the next flicker of life in the winter darkness. You leave the great hall behind, stepping once more into the breathless cold that sweeps across the open space like an invisible tide. The wind has grown sharper, carrying fine grains of snow that sting your cheeks. You tuck your chin deeper into your collar and walk toward the dim outline of a small peasant cottage farther down the lane. A faint orange glow seeps through its shutters, weaker than the glow in the hall yet persistent, like a cautious flame guarding its last strength. As you approach, you smell something familiar, the scent of slowly dying fire, earthy, smoky, tinged with resin. When you step inside, the first thing you notice is the family hovering around their hearth with almost ceremonial attention. The fire is not roaring. It is low, nearly swallowed by ash, but still alive. The embers glow through a thin blanket of white dust, glimmering like tiny buried suns. A woman kneels on the hearthstone, lifting a small wooden rake. She works with gentle care, pulling the ash forward and spreading it over the embers with practiced rhythm. The man of the house holds a charred log, its end glowing faintly. He does not place it directly on the embers. Instead, he tucks it into the ashes as if planting heat for the next morning. They are banking the fire, not tending it, not feeding it, banking it. A process older than recorded time, a ritual that decides how harsh the morning will feel. You kneel beside them and watch closely. The woman explains that this is the final task before sleep. Ash insulates the embers, slowing their loss of heat. If done correctly, the coals will survive the long winter night. If done poorly, they will wake to cold ash and a difficult morning of coaxing sparks from flint and steel. She adds that this practice shapes the rhythm of winter evenings. Families finish their chores early, eat early, and settle early, so they have enough time to cool the hearth just enough before burying its heart beneath ash. The idea fascinates you. It is like putting the fire to bed, trusting that it will still be warm beneath the covers by sunrise. The man looks up at you and smiles, saying that the banking process carries small risks. If the ash layer is too thin, the embers will die. If the ash is too thick, the the fire might smother completely. He gestures to a wooden paddle with a curved edge, its surface blackened by countless nights of handling embers. This paddle is the family's quiet heirloom, passed down, worn smooth, essential. As you sit beside the hearth, a child toddles over and hands you a small lump of dry moss tied with a cord. The mother laughs softly. The moss is not part of the fire ritual. It is merely a charm this child believes brings luck to the embers, an idea taught by a grandmother who enjoys keeping folk tales alive. You smile and gently place the charm near the hearth for the child's satisfaction. You lean closer to the fire and notice how the embers throb with life beneath the ash. Their glow pulses in slow movements, almost like breathing. You hold your hand just above them. The warmth rising from the hearth is faint but steady, enough to heat fingers, enough to keep the cottage slightly above freezing through the first hours of the night. The woman tells you something commonly mentioned in studies of medieval rural life. Firewood was precious, especially in colder regions. Villagers planned their winter fuel months ahead, often gathering wood throughout the year or trading for bundles when forests grew thin. Banking the fire was not simply convenience, it was survival. Fire-starting tools were slow, tedious, and unreliable. Embers were far more dependable. You shift your weight as the man demonstrates one final step. He gently drags a thick, charred stick across the hearth floor to arrange the remaining embers into a tight cluster before covering them. The ash settles with a soft hiss. He taps the hearthstone lightly, listening for the muffled crackling beneath the ash, confirming the coals are still alive. The room begins to cool as the fire quiets. You feel it almost immediately. The difference between a living flame and a buried ember is dramatic. The air becomes heavier, colder. Sharp drafts roam the corners of the room like restless shadows. The family does not seem disturbed by this. They begin to gather their blankets, preparing for bed. But before they settle, the man takes a long iron poker and touches it to the ash in 3 spots. You watch. The gesture carries quiet reverence, almost like a prayer. He tells you it is a family habit, not a village tradition. His father believed that marking the ash in 3 places helped distribute heat more evenly beneath the layer. No one knows if it truly works, but the family has kept the ritual alive. You stand and walk around the cottage, noticing how the room cools quickly. The windows whistle softly as the wind pushes through small gaps. The floor is cold beneath your boots. You understand why families hurry to bed after banking the fire. The hearth no longer warms the room. Its only job now is to survive the night. As you explore further, the oldest daughter lights a tiny rushlight from the last remaining flame before it disappears under ash. The small flame flickers brightly for a moment, then steadies. The rushlight becomes their final glow for bedtime tasks. She carries it across the room, illuminating shadows that gather behind tools and baskets. She pauses near a stack of chopped firewood and tells you something people in this region often believe. Cold embers with no living flame are considered unlucky to touch before sunrise. Old sayings insist that disturbing them brings bad weather. Whether this belief emerged from superstition or practical wisdom is unclear. Perhaps it was a way to keep curious hands away from dangerous coals at night. The girl sets the rushlight near her family's sleeping corner and pulls thick blankets over the straw bedding. She spreads old cloaks over the top and tucks in their edges with quick, efficient movements. 2 small dogs curl near the foot of the bed, their bodies already radiating warmth as they nestle into the straw. The woman folds her hands and tells you a curious detail from local memory. Some families used to sprinkle a pinch of dried herbs on the embers before banking them, hoping the scent would linger faintly through the night. She says the smell might not have lasted long, but it comforted people during the darkest nights. You imagine a faint trail of rosemary or sage drifting through a cold room. The room darkens as the rushlight burns lower. The family settles into their bed with soft shuffles and gentle whispers. The man pulls a wool blanket to his chin. The dogs stretch in sleepy contentment. The embers beneath the ash emit a faint glow, pulsing gently as if listening to the quiet. You step closer to the hearth one last time. The woman lifts a small piece of charcoal with tongs and places it near the center of the buried cluster. Her movements remain calm and careful. She explains that she places an extra coal there on nights colder than usual. She nods toward the shutter gaps that rattle with wind, adding that tonight needs every bit of heat. You watch as she smooths the ash one final time. The hearth becomes a small mound of white powder hiding its vital heart. You feel the warmth fading into the room's chill, like a sigh dissolving into silence. When you step outside, the cold night greets you again, yet you feel something different. You have just witnessed a quiet ritual that kept countless families alive for centuries. A ritual built on patience, trust, and intimate knowledge of fire. You take a long breath and walk forward through the snow. The embers behind you continue their slow, glowing work. Ahead lies more winter wisdom waiting to be discovered. You move on through the frozen night, your breath drifting upward in long, pale strands as you make your way toward another cluster of cottages. The cold presses harder now, as if midnight has sharpened its teeth. You wrap your arms around yourself and let your thoughts wander to how deeply winter dictates daily life here. It affects not only sleep, warmth, and shelter, but also the subtler rhythms of the body. You soon learn that medieval people understood this truth instinctively. They knew that surviving brutal nights depended not only on fires or blankets, but also on what they put into their stomachs before crawling under the covers. You reach the next cottage and smell something rich and comforting drifting through its walls. A scent of meat, fat, roasted oats, perhaps a hint of onion. Your stomach tightens with hunger. You push the door open and step inside, greeted instantly by a wave of warm, savory air. A family gathers around a wooden table. A pot sits near the hearth, its sides glistening faintly with grease. A woman ladles steaming stew into small bowls, each portion topped with a glimmering layer of fat that has not yet solidified. The man of the house gestures for you to join them. The family shifts closer together, making room for you at the table. You sit, feeling the heat rise from the pot. Steam curls into the air, carrying aromas that seem almost unreal after breathing frozen air for so long. The woman explains that they always eat something hearty before sleeping on winter nights. The cold drains energy quickly. A full stomach protects the body from losing heat too fast. You watch as she dips the ladle again, this time lifting a thicker mixture from the bottom of the pot. It contains barley, bits of salted pork, and small chunks of root vegetables grown in their garden before the frost set in. The food looks simple, but it feels luxurious in the context of a winter night. She hands you a bowl. You cradle it between your palms, letting the heat seep into your fingers. The warmth feels like a small miracle. You lift it to your lips and taste the thick, fatty broth. It coats your tongue with richness and clings to the back of your throat as you swallow. The sensation is immediate, comforting, grounding. The family watches you expectantly, hoping you might enjoy their humble meal, and when you smile, their faces brighten. The father explains that food like this is not only nourishment, but preparation for sleep. Fatty meals warm the body from the inside. Oats, barley, and meat provide slow-burning energy that lasts through the coldest hours. Modern science explains why this works, but medieval people discovered the truth through experience. A warm, full belly is a shield against the night. He adds that when the family is fortunate enough to have butter or suet, they mix it into their evening pottage. Even a spoonful helps. You glance at the pot and notice droplets of golden fat shimmering on the surface. The mother ladles more stew into her children's bowls, encouraging them to finish every last scrap. One of the older boys explains that they sometimes add dried peas to the pottage, especially on nights when the wind rattles the shutters with extra force. He leans across the table and grins, saying that peas stick to your ribs and keep you warm even if the fire dies. You laugh with him, the playful comment blending easily with the warm atmosphere. The mother offers you a small bowl filled with something darker. When you peer inside, you see small chunks of preserved meat and a thick glaze of rendered fat. She explains that this is winter stock, kept in the coldest corner of the cottage. The family eats it sparingly because it must last many nights. It tastes strong, salty, and dense with nutrients. She shares a detail that rural families often repeated among themselves. They believed that eating fatty foods before sleep made dreams more stable and restful. Whether this superstition has roots in biology or imagination does not matter. It brought comfort to people during long, icy nights. As you eat, you notice a small pot near the hearth filled with something else. It simmers slowly, barely bubbling. The father explains that it is a tonic made by boiling herbs like nettle, elderberry, and yarrow. Some villagers drink it before bed to ward off the winter shivers. He hands you a small wooden cup. The liquid smells sharp with herbs and faintly bitter. You take a sip. It warms your throat immediately, spreading heat into your chest. The effect feels soothing, like a soft breath unfolding inside you. A girl sitting across the table tells you that her grandmother insists this tonic keeps frost from settling too deeply into the bones. She shrugs, unsure if the old saying holds truth, but she drinks it anyway because it tastes like family tradition. Her grandmother says, "Winter respects those who respect their food." The father nods and adds another piece of local wisdom. Heavy meals help villagers sleep longer, and long sleep helps them avoid hourly exposure to the cold. The less they have to wake for hunger, the less they must brave the freezing air inside the cottage. You remember walking into homes earlier tonight and feeling how quickly heat escapes once fires dim. A long sleep is more than rest. It is preservation. He tells you that villagers often share advice on winter diet within the community. Some families reheat leftover fat in small pots and add it to bread or even smear it directly onto crusts to make them more sustaining. Others mix dried fruit, when available, into porridge to increase its warmth and sweetness. You imagine the comfort a simple bowl of warm porridge brings to children huddled in wool blankets during long nights. The mother leans in and mentions a small dispute that sometimes arises in conversations about winter practices. Some argue that eating heavy meals before bed leads to sluggish mornings. Others believe that slow mornings are worthwhile if they allow the body to survive the cold. Neither side claims victory. It is simply one of the many winter discussions that fill the dark nights. The family finishes their meal and stacks their bowls neatly. The children begin preparing their bedding, moving toward the warmest corner of the room. You help them shake out a wool blanket. As you lift it, you smell the faint aroma of herbs, likely added to the fabric during washing. The scent comforts you unexpectedly. You look back at the pot on the hearth. The stew inside now thickens as it cools. The mother places a wooden lid on top to preserve whatever remains. She tells you that tomorrow morning the stew will be warmed again with fresh water, and whatever they ate tonight will strengthen the new batch. Nothing is wasted in winter. Every scrap becomes a new meal. For a moment, the room falls quiet. The fire softens into a low glow. The children curl beneath their blankets. The parents adjust the hearth tools one last time. You realize how deeply food anchors them to the season. It fuels their bodies, their sleep, their rituals, and even their stories. When you step outside again, the cold meets you with familiar force, but you feel warmer. Not because the air has changed, but because you carry the memory of heat from inside. The rich stew, the herbal tonic, the laughter shared over dinner. These things follow you into the night like invisible embers. You walk on through the snow, feeling more grounded, more nourished, and more ready to learn how else the medieval world outsmarted winter. You leave the cottage with the rich stew still warming your stomach, and the cold outside feels slightly less cruel. Your breath trails behind you in slow plumes as you make your way toward another home. A faint fragrance drifts through the air. It is subtle, almost hidden beneath the scent of frost and wood smoke, but it grows stronger as you approach the next cottage. The smell is sweet, earthy, and comforting. You follow it like a thread until you reach a doorway with small bunches of dried plants hanging along the lintel. Someone has tied herbs here with thin twine, their shapes crisp from winter dryness. You open the door and step inside. Warm air, perfumed with herbs, wraps around you at once. The fragrance becomes fuller, rising from small bundles placed near the hearth, from bowls resting on shelves, and even from little cloth pouches tucked into pockets of the bedding. A woman stands near the fire crushing dried leaves in a wooden mortar. She looks up, wipes her hands on her apron, and invites you to come closer. You kneel beside her and inhale the blend of scents: lavender, chamomile, rosemary. Each one carries a slightly different personality, and together they create a cloud of calmness that makes you instantly relax. She explains that these herbs are not merely for pleasant smell, they help warm the body and ease the mind into restful sleep. Her voice is gentle, as though she knows these scents soothe not only the sick or exhausted, but anyone who braves the unforgiving cold outside. She takes a pinch of crushed chamomile and sprinkles it into a small cloth pouch. Then she ties the pouch shut with a practiced twist of her fingers. She hands it to you. The warmth of her hand has softened the herbs slightly, releasing an aroma that feels like soft blankets and quiet evenings. She says people tuck these pouches inside their clothes or under their pillows to help the night pass more comfortably. You examine the pouch and notice a faint golden powder clinging to the cloth. The fragrance grows stronger as it warms in your palm. She tells you that chamomile helps relax the muscles, while lavender calms the mind, and rosemary sharpens the breath on cold nights. The family believes these scents help them fall asleep faster, especially when the fire dies early and the cold presses into the house. The woman leads you to the family's sleeping area. Thick blankets lie folded at the foot of the bed, and beneath the top layer, a patchwork of tiny herb sachets is arranged neatly across the bedding. Some are tied with green thread, some with faded red string. She gently lifts one to show you how the herbs crumble slightly when pressed, releasing warm fragrances that drift into the air while people sleep. She explains a detail often mentioned in accounts of medieval household life. Herbs played a significant role in managing winter discomfort. People used them not only in cooking or healing, but also in daily routines that involved warmth and rest. She says the scent of lavender, especially, lingers for hours when trapped beneath blankets. The sweetness settles into the straw mattress and becomes part of the family's winter memory. A child wanders over with a small bundle of dried mint leaves. He plops them into your hand and grins mischievously. His mother laughs and tells you that mint is their little secret for nights when the air feels heavy. When crushed, it releases a sharp, energizing scent that wakes the senses, making cold nights less suffocating. The boy leans close and whispers that he sometimes hides mint under his brother's pillow to prank him. The scent startles the brother awake, and he always blames imaginary spirits. You laugh, amused by the simple mischief. In a world shaped by cold and necessity, small jokes like that must brighten the long nights. You move closer to the hearth. A pot sits bubbling quietly with a mixture that smells both woody and sweet. The woman stirs it with a wooden spoon, explaining that this is an herbal brew meant for drinking before sleep. She ladles some into a cup and hands it to you. The liquid is warm and slightly bitter, with hints of honey softening its edges. As it slides down your throat, warmth blooms in your chest like a slow sunrise. She tells you that this brew is made from winter herbs dried in late autumn. Some villagers make stronger versions for those suffering from chills or lingering coughs. A neighbour once mixed thyme, sage and horseradish into a single pot, creating a drink so potent that no one could decide whether it was medicine or punishment. As the family prepares their bedding, the father steps inside from the cold, carrying a small bundle of dried plants he collected earlier in the day. He shakes loose the snowflakes clinging to them and spreads them near the fire to dry. He tells you that he prefers to gather herbs personally because each plant carries its own quirks. Some dry faster, some release stronger scents, some crumble too easily. His method involves testing everything until he knows which plants will help the family on which nights. He adds a curious comment that reflects a subtle wisdom passed down across generations. Certain herbs behave differently in deep winter than in autumn or spring. He believes the cold strengthens their aroma, sealing the oils inside until they are warmed. Whether this is scientifically true or not, you can see why families continue to believe it. The mother invites you to help arrange the sleeping area. Together you lift the blankets and sprinkle a few dried petals between the layers. The petals crackle quietly as they settle. The children giggle, pretending the petals are magical flakes that ward off nightmares. You smile, appreciating the mixture of practicality and imagination that fills this home. Once the bedding is arranged, the parents show you one more practice. They take a small clay bowl filled with smouldering herbs and carry it across the room. The herbs release a soft stream of fragrant smoke that drifts like a gentle fog. They walk slowly, letting the smoke circulate. It creates a warm, comforting haze that settles in the air and clings to the walls. The father says this cleansing ritual keeps sickness away and adds a layer of warmth to the cottage. The idea fascinates you, not because the smoke truly heats the room, but because it transforms the atmosphere into something intimate and protected. He leans closer and shares a scholarly question that often arises in discussions of medieval herbal practices. Some researchers think these rituals served mostly practical purposes like masking smells or repelling insects. Others believe the rituals also carried emotional importance, helping families feel less vulnerable during the darkest nights. No definite answer exists, since written sources vary. Yet when you stand here, breathing in the smoky fragrance, it feels entirely reasonable that both explanations might be true. The little boy with the mint bundle tugs your sleeve and leads you to the window. Frost patterns lace the glass, forming delicate shapes like feathers and vines. He presses his palm to the frost, then quickly pulls it back with a laugh. His breath fogs the glass, leaving a small round patch of warmth. You mimic the action and feel the cold sting your skin. You both laugh quietly, sharing a moment of simple joy. As the night deepens, the family prepares to sleep. The parents settle beneath the thick blankets. The children climb in beside them. The herb sachets release their perfumes, filling the tiny room with a dreamy calm. The fire dims, but the air remains fragrant and warm in spirit, even if the temperature drops. You stand for a moment soaking in the harmony of the scene. The room faintly glows with the last embers of the fire. The scent of lavender and chamomile lingers like a soft sigh. You feel yourself relax just by standing here. When you finally step outside again, the cold rushes to greet you, eager as always. But you carry the warmth of herbs in your senses, a warm pocket of memory that seems to shield your thoughts from the freezing air. You walk forward, ready to discover what other secrets the winter night still hides. You continue through the sleeping village with the scent of herbs still lingering in your clothing. The cold presses against you, insistent and needling, but now you understand why every cottage you have visited so far feels layered with its own kind of warmth. Some homes rely on straw, some on wool, some on clever architecture, others on fragrant sleep aids. Yet there is another layer of winter survival you have not seen closely, something so simple and universal that it touches every family regardless of wealth: the clothing they sleep in. You walk toward a modest cottage lit by a faint, wavering glow. Inside, the fire is nearly gone, just a stub of light flickering like a sleepy heartbeat. The room is chilly, but not lifeless. A woman sits on a wooden stool near the hearth, holding a linen nightshirt in her lap. She sews a patch onto one shoulder using slow, careful stitches. When she notices you, she smiles with tired warmth and invites you to sit near her. The nightshirt looks worn and softened by many winters. You touch the fabric lightly. It is coarse, but surprisingly pliable. Linen breathes well, she explains, and though it is not the warmest cloth on its own, it works beautifully when layered beneath wool. She lifts a thick woolen over-tunic and lays it beside the linen garment. Together they form the sleeping outfit her husband will wear tonight. She tells you that winter nightclothes are as important as blankets. Medieval people needed layers that trapped heat close to their bodies, but did not suffocate them. She shakes out the woolen over-tunic, revealing faint marks where it has been stitched and restitched through the years. Threadbare patches have been reinforced with scraps of cloth. Every piece tells a story of past winters. You reach for the tunic and feel the texture between your fingers. It is heavy. The wool has a slight sheen from lanolin. Its thickness promises warmth. The woman explains that they rarely wash these garments in winter because the natural oils help repel moisture and hold heat better. She chuckles, adding that smell becomes less of a concern when survival takes center stage. Her daughter enters the room, wearing a nightcap tied neatly under her chin. The cap is made of wool, with a linen lining on the inside. She adjusts it shyly and tells you the cap keeps heat from escaping the head. Without it, she wakes up cold no matter how many blankets she uses. You nod, realizing how much body heat rises and how easily it escapes into the air without protection. The girl holds out a second cap for you to examine. The fabric is soft where it touches the forehead but rougher on the outside. It has been mended several times. The mother says caps like this were essential, even in wealthier homes. Some were decorated with embroidery or trimmed with finer fabrics, especially among the upper classes. Here, though, practicality rules. The father soon enters from a small adjoining room, pulling at the sleeves of a long linen shirt he has just put on. Over it he wears a woolen jerkin that seems almost too thick for sleep. But he tells you that nights like this demand protection from the cold. The jerkin traps warmth close to his core. He ties it snugly with a cord around his waist. He chuckles and shows you the long woolen stockings he wears to bed. They reach almost to his thighs and are fastened by simple garters. Without them, he says, his legs ache from the cold by dawn. You run your fingers across the stockings. The knit is tight, dense, and slightly scratchy. But that scratchiness is part of their charm, he adds. It reminds him he is warm and alive on winter nights. The mother picks up a small bundle of cloth from a bench and unfolds it. Inside are gloves, thin linen gloves, worn under heavier wool mittens. She explains that she sleeps with the linen pair only, while her husband sometimes adds the wool layer if the wind is fierce. Fingers grow stiff easily in winter, and once stiff, they lose heat faster. Protecting them at night helps avoid painful mornings when work must begin early. You watch the family move through their nighttime ritual. Layer by layer, they prepare their bodies for sleep, just as earlier families prepared their bedding or their herbs. Each garment has a purpose. Each layer works with the others. The father sits by the hearth and adjusts a second layer of wool around his shoulders. The firelight glimmers against the fabric. He tells you something commonly noted in medieval writings. People often slept in the same clothes they wore during the day, because changing garments in cold weather invited chills. But when it came to true winter nights, specific sleep garments became precious. They helped maintain warmth without wearing out daily clothes too quickly. You touch the edge of one of the woolen garments again, feeling the ridged weave pattern under your fingertips. Wool catches warmth so quickly. Even a few minutes near the hearth makes it feel alive with heat. You think back to the furs and quilts you saw earlier, realizing how crucial fabric is when fire grows tired and the night deepens. The little girl pulls a pair of soft socks from a shelf and shows them to you proudly. They are made from thick scraps of wool and lined with a bit of rabbit fur at the toes. She explains that her grandmother crafted them and promised they would keep her feet warm even on the longest nights. She wiggles her toes as if demonstrating their power. You smile, touched by the small moment of childish pride. The mother lights a tiny tallow candle, barely more than a stub, and carries it toward the bed. She sets it on a low shelf and lets its flickering glow reveal the sleeping space. The bed is covered with 2 layers of blankets, each carefully arranged. She places woolen night shawls along the head of the bed for extra warmth, should someone wake shivering. The father steps beside you and shares a thought that many families in this region agree on. Good night clothes save more warmth than a weak fire. Fire warms a room, but clothing warms the person directly. On the harshest nights, wind can steal heat from the very air, but clothing clings tightly to the body, serving as the final defense. He then describes a lingering question often discussed by those who study medieval daily life. Did most people wear multiple layers to bed every night in winter, or only during extreme cold. Some argue that thick layers were a constant need. Others suggest families adapted based on how much fuel they had for the fire or how drafty their homes were. He shrugs, admitting that people did whatever kept them alive. Practices likely shifted from village to village, or even from family to family. As the family prepares to lie down, the mother arranges their sleeping garments one last time. She tucks the children into their separate woolen layers before pulling blankets over them. The daughter snuggles into her cap and lets out a contented sigh. The father crawls under the blankets with deliberate slowness so he does not let cold air slip inside. He pats the space beside him and jokes that his jerkin makes him feel like a walking furnace. His wife laughs quietly and settles beside him, adjusting her own layers. You stand and absorb the peaceful moment. Their garments whisper softly against the blankets, each layer working together to turn an icy night into bearable warmth. You realize how much these clothes mean to them. They are not luxuries. They are survival tools, shaped by years of tradition and necessity. Outside, the cold waits, but in here, wool, linen, and careful layering stand firm. You give the family a gentle nod and step out into the night once more. The wind greets you sharply, but your mind carries the warmth of thick stockings, nightcaps, and patched wool tunics. Each cottage